She called me. My name is Judith, and I am 34 years old. For most of my life, I believed that my quiet nature was a weakness, something to be overcome. But in the end, it was the very thing that allowed me to see into the heart of a broken family, and in doing so, I found a love that was deeper and more real than any glittering prize. This is the story of how I, a simple governess, walked into a house of ghosts and found a home, and how a beautiful socialite's ambition shattered against the quiet strength of a family rebuilding itself from the ashes. She thought she could win a man's fortune, but she never understood that his heart was the real treasure, and it wasn't for sale. Before I dive into this story of love, loss, and the quiet triumph of compassion over calculation, I'd love to know where you all are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated, or if you believe in the power of a quiet and gentle heart, go ahead and hit that like button for me. And for all of you who are new here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of people who know that the most powerful stories are often the ones whispered, not shouted. It all started with an advertisement, 3 short lines in a London newspaper that felt more like a warning than an invitation. Governess required for 2 children. Blackwood Manor, Northumbria. Discretion and patience essential. The name Blackwood carried a weight to it, a name associated with old money and more recently with profound tragedy. Roland Blackwood, the master of the estate, was a modern-day recluse, a man who had vanished from public life after the sudden death of his wife, Liana, a year prior. The society pages had been filled with it for weeks, the beautiful, vibrant Liana Blackwood gone in an instant, and then silence. A silence so complete it was as if the whole family had been buried with her. When my carriage finally rolled through the imposing iron gates of Blackwood Manor, I understood the silence. The estate was breathtakingly beautiful, a sprawling Gothic masterpiece of gray stone and climbing ivy. But it was a beauty that held its breath. The air itself seemed heavy, saturated with unspoken grief. The grounds were meticulously kept, yet felt wild and untamed, as if nature was slowly trying to reclaim what sorrow had abandoned. As I stepped out, a chill that had nothing to do with the northern air settled deep into my bones. This was not just a house, it was a mausoleum, a monument to a love that had been lost. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Gable, met me at the door. She was tall and severe, her gray hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. Her expression was one of perpetual, weary disapproval. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple wool coat and worn leather satchel. I could almost hear her thoughts, clear as a bell. Another one. How long will she last? "Miss Thompson," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Mr. Blackwood is not available. I will show you to your rooms and introduce you to the children." She led me through hallways that echoed with our footsteps. The interior of the manor was as cold as its exterior. Dark wood paneling drank the light from the tall, arched windows. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched me pass, their painted eyes seeming to follow my every move. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of sunlight, the only sign of life in the cavernous rooms. Every surface was polished to a high sheen, every piece of furniture perfectly placed, yet it felt entirely unlived in. It was a museum of a life, not a home. My rooms were in a separate wing, comfortable but Spartan. From my window, I could see a walled garden, choked with weeds and tangled vines, its gate rusted half shut. It looked as forgotten as the rest of the house felt. Mrs. Gable left me with a curt instruction to be ready in an hour. Later, she led me to the nursery. It was a large, airy room that should have been filled with light and laughter, but it was as silent as a tomb. A boy of about 10 sat hunched over a book, his dark hair falling over his eyes. He didn't look up when we entered. A little girl, perhaps 6, sat on the floor, her back to us, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with one missing eye. "These are the children," Mrs. Gable announced, as if presenting exhibits. "Leo and Amelia." I knelt down slowly, so as not to startle the little girl. "Hello, Amelia," I said softly. "My name is Judith. It's very nice to meet you." She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. I turned my attention to the boy. "Hello, Leo." He finally looked up, and his eyes were startlingly old in his young face. They were his father's eyes, I would later learn, a deep, stormy gray, and they were filled with a raw, defensive anger. "Are you going to leave too?" he asked, his voice sharp and accusing. The question caught me off guard. "They all leave," he said, turning a page in his book with a snap. "The last one cried all the time. It was annoying." Mrs. Gable sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Leo, behave." But I saw past the boy's rudeness. I saw the fear beneath it. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to protect himself. He was building a wall of thorns so no one else could get close enough to abandon him. And little Amelia, she had simply retreated inside herself, to a place where no one could reach her, and therefore no one could hurt her. My first few weeks at Blackwood Manor were a study in patience. I never saw Roland Blackwood. He was a phantom, a ghost in his own home. I would sometimes hear his heavy footsteps in the hallway late at night, or catch a glimpse of his silhouette in a distant window as I walked the grounds, but he remained unseen. He ate his meals alone in his study. The children, it seemed, ate their meals alone in the nursery. The entire family was a constellation of lonely stars, orbiting a black hole of grief. I focused on the children. I didn't push Amelia to speak. Instead, I would sit on the floor near her, sometimes for an hour at a time, and simply talk. I'd tell her about the birds I saw outside the window, or describe the pictures in a storybook, or hum a simple tune. I brought a sketchbook and some charcoal pencils into the nursery one day, and began to draw the view from the window. I left the materials out, and a few days later, I found a small, shaky drawing of a bear, with one eye next to my own. It was the first sign of life, a tiny green shoot pushing through frozen ground. Leo was a harder fortress to breach. He tested me relentlessly. He asked obscure questions from his textbooks, trying to catch me out. He would make cynical, biting remarks about everything I did. But I didn't rise to the bait. I answered his questions calmly. I ignored his barbs. One afternoon, while exploring the cavernous library, a room so vast it felt like a cathedral dedicated to books, I found a leather-bound volume tucked away on a high shelf. It was a collection of local Northumbrian folklore, filled with tales of dragons, sea serpents, and ancient kings. Tucked inside the front cover was a delicate, faded bookplate, from the library of Liana Blackwood. That evening, I brought the book to the nursery. "I found something I thought you might like," I said to Leo, holding it out. He eyed it with suspicion. "What is it?" "Stories," I said simply. "About this place, about the history of the land your home is on." His curiosity warred with his defensiveness. Curiosity won. He took the book and opened it. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps pain. He traced the bookplate with his finger. "This was my mother's," he whispered, his voice suddenly small. "I thought it might be," I replied gently. "Would you like me to read some of it to you? To both of you?" He hesitated, then gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. I settled into a chair, and Amelia, for the first time, shuffled a little closer, her bear held tight against her chest. I began to read, my voice soft in the quiet room. I read about the Lambton worm and the ghostly Grey Lady of the Moors, and for a little while the three of us were just people sharing a story, and the heavy silence of the manor receded, just for a moment. From a crack in the doorway, unseen by any of us, Roland Blackwood stood and watched. He saw the way the little girl, his silent, lost Amelia, had moved towards the sound of my voice. He saw the hard lines around his son's mouth soften as he listened to a story from his mother's book. He saw a flicker of the life that had been extinguished a year ago, and it was both a comfort and a torment. He had hired me to educate his children, but he was beginning to see that I was doing something far more important. I was trying to heal them. It was a fragile peace, and it was shattered by the arrival of Isabella de Courcy. She descended upon Blackwood Manor like a bird of paradise in a flock of crows. She arrived in a gleaming silver car that crunched loudly on the gravel drive, a stark contrast to the quiet clip-clop of the carriage that had brought me. She was stunningly beautiful, with raven black hair, eyes the color of emeralds, and a smile that was dazzling and entirely insincere. She was draped in expensive fabrics and smelled of a perfume so strong it lingered in the air long after she had passed. She swept into the main hall, calling out Roland's name, in a voice that was musical and commanding. "Roland, darling, I know you've been hiding yourself away, but I simply couldn't bear it another moment. I had to come and see how you were." Mrs. Gable's face tightened, but she said nothing. Roland emerged from his study, and for the first time I saw him up close. He was tall and broad-shouldered, but he seemed diminished, as if his grief were a physical weight bending him inward. His face was handsome, but etched with exhaustion and a deep, profound sadness. "Isabella," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is unexpected." "Nonsense," she trilled, kissing the air on both sides of his face. "Liana would have wanted me to look after you. We were like sisters, after all." The claim hung in the air, heavy and false. I had learned from snippets of conversation with the kitchen staff that Isabella and Liana had moved in the same circles, but their relationship had been one of rivalry, not friendship. Isabella was using a dead woman as a key to unlock the doors of the manor. She spotted me then, standing quietly by the staircase with the children, who had come to see what the commotion was about. Her eyes swept over me, dismissing my plain dress and simple hairstyle in a single cold glance. "Oh," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "and you must be the new help, the governess." She didn't wait for an introduction. "Wonderful. It's so important for the children to have stability." The way she said the word made it sound like a consolation prize. She then turned her brilliant smile on the children. "And look at you two, my poor, sweet darlings." She produced 2 lavishly wrapped gifts. For Leo, a complex electronic gadget he had no interest in, and for Amelia, a horrifyingly bright pink doll that shrieked a tinny song when you pressed its stomach. Leo stared at his gift with open disdain. Amelia shrank behind my legs, clutching her worn bear even tighter, terrified of the noisy doll. Isabella's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The children's rejection of her perfect, expensive gifts was an affront. "They're just shy," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "They'll come around." Over the next few days, Isabella installed herself in the manor's finest guest suite and began her campaign. Her strategy was twofold. First, to position herself as the indispensable link to Roland's past, to Liana. She would constantly bring up memories, shared holidays, and private jokes, all carefully curated to highlight her own proximity to the woman he had lost. "Oh, Liana adored this champagne," she would say at dinner. Or, "I remember when Liana and I went to Paris. She would have loved for you to see it again, Roland." She was wrapping herself in the ghost of his wife, hoping he wouldn't notice she was a hollow imitation. Her second strategy was to subtly undermine me. She would refer to me as the girl, or the nanny. She'd countermand my instructions to the children with a sweet, poisonous smile. "Oh, darling, you don't want to be reading those dusty old books. Let's play with your new doll," she'd say to Amelia, who would just stare at her, silent and unmoving. She treated me with a condescending politeness that was more insulting than open hostility. To her, I was a piece of furniture, a temporary fixture that would soon be replaced when she became the new lady of the manor. What Isabella failed to understand was that grief is a quiet language. It doesn't respond to loud declarations or grand gestures. It responds to presence, to patience, to the steady, unspoken promise that you will not run away from the pain. While she was filling the house with noise and expensive perfume, I was sitting on the nursery floor, learning the language of Amelia's drawings. Her bears were always drawn small and alone in the corner of the page. But one day, after a week of my constant quiet presence, she drew a second, slightly larger figure next to the bear. It was just a stick figure, but I knew it was me. I also discovered that Leo wasn't just angry, he was a brilliant observer. He saw right through Isabella's performance. "She talks about my mother all the time," he told me one afternoon as we sat by the nursery window, "but she gets everything wrong. Mum hated champagne, she liked cider, and she never called Dad darling. He said it with such venom that I almost felt sorry for Isabella. Almost. She was trying to charm a boy who had an unerring instinct for the truth. My real breakthrough, however, came from the forgotten walled garden. I had been drawn to it since my arrival, that secret, neglected space. One afternoon, I asked Mrs. Gable about it. Her stern face softened for the first time since I'd met her. "That was Mistress Liana's garden," she said, her voice quiet. "She loved it, grew everything herself, flowers, herbs, vegetables. The children used to spend hours in there with her." She looked out the window towards the rusted gate. "It hasn't been touched since she passed. The master couldn't bear it." An idea began to form in my mind, a fragile, hopeful thing. That evening, I broached the subject with the children. "I was thinking," I began carefully, "about that old walled garden. It's a bit of a mess, isn't it?" Leo shrugged, not looking up from his book. "It's just a bunch of weeds." "It is now," I agreed. "But it wasn't always. Your mother made it beautiful." I was thinking, maybe we could try to make it beautiful again, for her. He looked up then, his guard fully in place. "What's the point? She's not here to see it." "No," I said softly. "She's not, but we are, and maybe it would feel good to make something grow again." I left it at that. I didn't push. But the next morning, I found Leo standing by the rusted gate, peering through the bars at the tangled mess within. Amelia stood a few feet behind him, her silent shadow. "The gate's locked," he said, his back to me. "I believe I can find the key," I replied. It took some convincing, but Mrs. Gable, seeing the flicker of interest in the children, produced a large iron key. The lock was stiff and protested with a loud groan, but it finally gave way. We stepped inside. It was a chaotic wilderness. Weeds grew waist-high, and thorny brambles had strangled what must have once been rose bushes. A stone birdbath was green with moss, and a wooden bench had begun to rot. But beneath the decay, the garden's good bones were still there. Stone pathways, a sturdy trellis, the outline of old flower beds. It was a place that had been loved, and it was waiting to be loved again. "Where do we even start?" Leo asked, overwhelmed. "With one weed," I said, and I bent down and pulled one from the earth. And so, our project began. It was slow, arduous work. We filled wheelbarrows with weeds and thorns. We uncovered the lost stone paths. Leo, to my surprise, took to the physical labor with a fierce determination. It was a way for him to channel his anger into something productive. He hacked at the brambles with a ferocity that was almost frightening, but when he was done, he would stand back, breathing heavily, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Amelia was my little shadow. She would follow me as I worked, her bear tucked under one arm. She wouldn't pull the big weeds, but she would carefully pick the tiny ones from between the cobblestones. One afternoon, I found a small packet of forget-me-not seeds in a rusted tin in the old potting shed. I showed them to her, pouring a few of the tiny black specks into her palm. I helped her dig a small patch of earth, and she carefully, deliberately placed the seeds into the soil and covered them up. She looked up at me, her expression solemn, as if she had just completed a sacred ritual. We spent every afternoon in that garden. It became our sanctuary. We didn't talk much about Liana, but her presence was all around us, in the ghost of a path she had laid, in the hardy perennials that had survived the neglect. We were not just clearing a garden, we were tending to our grief, one weed at a time. Roland began to notice the change. He saw the dirt under his son's fingernails and the healthy flush on his daughter's cheeks. He heard the sound of the wheelbarrow creaking from his study window. One evening, he came looking for us. He stopped at the garden gate, watching us work in the fading light. Leo was clearing the last of the thorns from a climbing rose, and I was showing Amelia how to water the patch where she had planted her seeds. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Leo straightened up, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "We're fixing Mum's garden," he said, a note of pride in his voice. Roland stepped inside, looking around at the progress we had made. His eyes were filled with a complex mixture of pain and wonder. He walked over to the bench and ran a hand over the weathered wood. "She loved this place," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time. There was no dismissal in his gaze, no sense of me being the help. There was only a quiet, searching gratitude. "Thank you," he said. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. A shift in the atmosphere of the house. We were no longer three lonely people and a ghost. We were four. Isabella, of course, saw our garden project as nothing more than a dirty, undignified hobby. "Honestly, Roland," she said one evening at dinner, wrinkling her nose, "you can't have the children looking like little street urchins, and that governess encourages it. They should be focusing on their studies, French, piano, things that will be useful." Roland looked at her, his expression unreadable. "They are learning something useful," he said quietly. "They are learning how to bring something back to life." The remark hung in the air, a clear rebuke. Isabella's smile tightened. She saw the growing connection between me and the children, and she saw the thawing in Roland's demeanor. She recognized me as a threat. Not for Roland's affection. She couldn't imagine he would ever look at a plain governess that way, but for his attention. I was a distraction from her ultimate goal, and so she decided it was time to escalate her campaign. It was time to remind Roland of the world he belonged to, the world of glittering parties and influential people, a world where she reigned supreme, and I was invisible. "Darling," she announced a few days later, her voice bright with manufactured excitement. "I've had the most marvelous idea. It has been far too long since this house has seen any life. We're going to throw a dinner party, a proper one, to let everyone know that you're back." Roland looked horrified. "Isabella. No, I'm not ready for that." "Nonsense," she said, waving away his objections. "It's what Liana would have wanted. She wouldn't want you to hide away in mourning forever. We'll invite the Barclays, and Lord and Lady Hemmings. It will be a triumph." She didn't wait for his consent. She simply began. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparations, orchestrated entirely by Isabella. Florists and caterers and musicians descended upon the manor. Isabella swept through the house, issuing orders, changing furniture arrangements, and generally treating the place as if it were already her own. She was in her element, a general commanding an army, preparing for her coronation. She took particular pleasure in asserting her authority over me. "Judith, dear," she'd say, handing me a list. "Be a doll and polish the silver. My guests are used to a certain standard." Or, "The children will need to be kept out of the way on the night of the party. See that they have their dinner in the nursery and are in bed early. We can't have them underfoot." Her message was clear. This is my world, and you are just a servant in it. The night of the party was as dreadful as I had imagined. The house was filled with loud, braying people who wore their wealth like armor. They spoke of stocks and yachts and scandals, their laughter echoing unnaturally in the grand, somber rooms. Roland moved among them like a sleepwalker, his face a polite, empty mask. He was a prisoner in his own home. Isabella was radiant. She floated from group to group, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat, accepting compliments on her magnificent home. She was playing the role of Lady Blackwood to perfection. As instructed, I kept the children in the nursery, but the noise from downstairs was impossible to ignore. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It was an assault on the quiet world we had built. Leo was sullen and angry, pacing the room like a caged animal. Amelia was visibly distressed. She sat in a corner, her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. Around 9 o'clock, the noise level swelled, and it was too much for her. A small whimper escaped her lips, then another. It escalated into a full-blown panic attack. She was gasping for air, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with terror. I scooped her up and held her tight. "It's all right, sweetheart. I've got you. Let's go somewhere quiet." I carried her out of the nursery, intending to take her to my rooms, but the sounds were just as loud in the hallway. The only place of true silence, our sanctuary, was the garden. I carried her down a back staircase and out into the cool night air. The garden was peaceful, bathed in moonlight. The sounds from the house were muted here. I sat with Amelia on our bench, stroking her hair and humming a soft lullaby until her trembling subsided and her breathing returned to normal. But our escape hadn't gone unnoticed. Leo, seeing his sister's distress and boiling with a righteous fury he could no longer contain, had marched downstairs. He found Isabella holding court near the fireplace. He walked straight up to her, his small face set in a look of grim determination. "My mother would have hated this," he said, his voice ringing out in a sudden lull in the conversation. "She hated parties, and she hated fake people." A shocked silence fell over the room. Isabella's face went white, then flushed a deep, ugly red. "Leo, how dare you? Go to your room at once." "No," he said, standing his ground. "This is my house. You're the one who should go." Roland, who had been trapped in a conversation across the room, saw the whole exchange. He saw the fury on Isabella's face and the defiant terror in his son's eyes. In that moment, something inside him broke. The polite mask shattered. He strode across the room and placed a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. He looked at Isabella, and his voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "The boy is right. This was a mistake." He then turned to the stunned guests. "I apologize, but the evening is over. Thank you all for coming." There was a flurry of confused murmurs and awkward goodbyes. Isabella stood frozen, humiliated. Roland ignored her, his only concern for his son. "Where is your sister?" he asked Leo gently. "In the garden," Leo mumbled, "with Judith." Roland led Leo out the same back door I had used. He found me on the bench, with Amelia now fast asleep in my arms, her tear-stained face peaceful against my shoulder. He stopped a few feet away, taking in the scene. The moonlight, the sleeping child, the quiet governess who had calmed the storm. He looked back at the house, at the garish lights and the remnants of a party he never wanted, and the contrast was stark and absolute. He saw Isabel's world, a world of noise, performance, and ambition, and he saw my world, a world of quiet, patience, and healing. He knew, in that moment, which one was real. The next morning, the house was preternaturally quiet. The caterers had cleared away the evidence of the party, but a stale, lingering scent of champagne and perfume hung in the air, a ghost of the previous night's failure. Isabella had confined herself to her suite, a thundercloud of silent fury. Roland had been in his study since dawn, the door firmly closed. I took the children out to the garden as soon as we had finished our breakfast. The cool, clean air was a balm after the oppressive atmosphere of the house. Leo was subdued, worried he was in trouble for his outburst. I reassured him that he had been brave to speak the truth. Amelia was still quiet, but the frantic terror from the night before was gone. She pottered around her patch of earth, gently touching the tiny green shoots that were just beginning to poke through the soil. Her forget-me-nots were growing. Around mid-morning, the storm broke. Isabella swept down the main staircase, dressed not in a morning gown, but in an elegant traveling suit. She was a woman on a mission. She didn't knock on the study door, she threw it open. I was in the main hall, ostensibly looking for a book on botany for Leo, and I couldn't help but overhear. "Roland, we need to talk," she began, her voice tight with controlled rage. Roland's voice was weary, flat. "I think everything that needed to be said was said last night." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "That was a childish tantrum. What I am talking about is our future, your future. You are making a terrible mistake, hiding yourself away with these children and their mousy little governess. Judith has been a blessing to this family," Roland said, his voice firming. Isabella let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "A blessing? Roland, be serious. She is a servant, a nobody. She is manipulating those children, turning them against me, making you think you need her. She's playing a long game. Can't you see that? She wants what I want, but she's just more subtle about it." "What is it you think you both want, Isabella?" "This," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "This house, your name, your position. I am offering you a partnership, Roland. I can restore your place in society. I can connect you to the right people. I can be the wife you need, the hostess Liana was. I can give you the world. That girl can give you nothing but dirt under your fingernails and sentimental nonsense about gardens." "You are mistaken," Roland said, his voice now dangerously cold. "You are not offering me a partnership. You are proposing a business merger, and you are mistaken about what I need, and you are most certainly mistaken about what Liana would have wanted. Liana would have wanted you to be happy, to be strong, not to wither away in this shrine to the past. Liana would have wanted her children to be loved and cared for," Roland countered, his voice cutting through her tirade. "She would have wanted them to be protected from people like you, who see them as accessories, as obstacles to be managed." It was then that the children appeared at the top of the staircase. They had heard the shouting and had come to investigate. I moved to intercept them, but Leo brushed past me, his face set. Amelia followed, her small hand clutching the back of his shirt. They walked down the stairs and stood in the doorway of the study, silent witnesses. Isabella saw them, and her face contorted in fury. "You see? She sends them in, theatrics." But Roland was only looking at his children. He saw the protective stance Leo took, placing himself slightly in front of me as I came to stand behind them. He saw Amelia, who was clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "It's over, Isabella," Roland said, his voice filled with a profound finality. "I want you to leave." "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll be a laughingstock, the tragic widower who let the help ruin him." As she spoke, Amelia let go of her brother's shirt. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of her father. She held up the piece of paper. It was a drawing, rendered in the shaky, earnest hand of a 6-year-old. It depicted 4 stick figures, a tall one, her father, a smaller one with a book, Leo, a very small one, holding a bear, herself, and next to her, holding her hand, was a figure with brown hair, me. We were all standing in a garden, under a brightly smiling sun, surrounded by clumsy, colorful flowers. She looked up at her father, her gray eyes wide and serious. Then she turned her head and looked directly at Isabella, who stood fuming by the desk. A tiny frown creased Amelia's brow, and then she spoke. Her voice was a small, rusty whisper, the first word she had spoken to anyone but me in nearly a year. "No," she said. It was just one word, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Isabella froze, her mouth slightly agape. Roland stared at his daughter as if he were seeing a miracle. Amelia then turned away from Isabella, dismissing her completely. She looked at me, her gaze clear and pleading. She reached out her free hand. And then she spoke again, her voice a little stronger this time. "Stay," she said. That was the moment everything changed. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Roland looked from his daughter's hopeful face to Isabella's mask of pure, ugly shock. He saw the truth laid bare. Isabella spoke of giving him the world, a glittering, hollow globe of social engagements and strategic alliances. But this little girl, his lost, silent daughter who had finally found her voice, was offering him a real one, a world built on quiet care, on patience, on the slow, steady work of healing. A world where her drawing was not just a picture, but a map to the future. He knelt down in front of Amelia and took her drawing with a trembling hand. He looked at it, his eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He stood up and faced Isabella. The grief and exhaustion that had clouded his features for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a calm, unshakable certainty. "I believe you were leaving," he said. His voice was not angry. It was not emotional. It was a simple statement of fact, as final and absolute as a locked door. Isabella stared at him, her emerald eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and fury. She had played her hand, her very best hand, and she had lost. She had lost to a child's drawing and 2 whispered words. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the study, out of the house, and out of our lives. The sound of her silver car roaring down the gravel drive was the sound of our new beginning. In the silence that followed Isabella's departure, the house seemed to take its first deep breath in a year. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a fragile, tentative peace. Even Mrs. Gable, as she passed me in the hallway, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval, which from her was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The great battle was over, and our quiet little world had won. That evening, something remarkable happened. Roland did not take his dinner in his study. Instead, he came to the kitchen, where I was helping the children with their meal. He pulled up a chair at the simple wooden table, a table meant for the staff, and sat with us. It was the first time the three of them had shared a meal since Liana's death. There was no fine china, no polished silver, just simple crockery and the warm, comforting smell of Mrs. Gable's shepherd's pie. Leo, free from the tension of the past few weeks, chattered animatedly about his plans for the garden. He wanted to build a cold frame for seedlings and find a book on identifying local birds. He was a different boy, his cynical armor shed, revealing the bright, curious child beneath. Amelia sat beside her father, occasionally murmuring a word or two, pointing at things with her fork. She ate all of her dinner. She even ate her peas. Roland watched them, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. He wasn't just looking at his children, he was seeing them, truly seeing them, for the first time in a long time. It was in that simple, domestic moment, in the cheerful chaos of a kitchen meal, that they began to feel like a family again. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, Roland found me in the library. I was tidying the books, my mind still reeling from the day's events. "Judith," he said from the doorway. I turned, a little startled. He walked into the room, his hands in his pockets. He looked younger, less burdened. "I need to apologize to you," he began, his voice sincere. "I never should have allowed Isabella to treat you that way. I was adrift, and I let her take the helm. I am sorry for any pain or humiliation she caused you." "You don't need to apologize," I said quietly. "Your only concern was your children. But she made you a target because of that," he countered. "She saw how much they had come to rely on you, how much I had." He paused, searching for the right words. "When I saw you in the garden last night, with Amelia, I realized you haven't just been teaching them, you've been protecting them. You built a sanctuary for them, when I was too lost in my own grief to do it myself." We stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken things. "I would like you to stay, Judith," he said finally, "not just as a governess, but as a part of this family. If you would be willing." He didn't know how to phrase it, the proposition that was not yet a proposition. But I understood. He was asking me to remain a fixture in their lives, a permanent part of this new world we were building. "I'd like that very much," I replied, a genuine smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time that day. "Good," he said, relief washing over his face. "That's very good." He looked out the tall library window towards the moonlit grounds. "Would you care for a walk? The air is clear tonight." We walked out into the garden, our sanctuary. The moon was bright, casting silver shadows across the newly cleared pathways. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. We didn't talk about Isabella or the disastrous party. We talked about the future. We talked about Leo's passion for history and Amelia's burgeoning artistic talent. We talked about the simple joy of watching things grow. It was a conversation filled with hope, a quiet, gentle exploration of the new landscape of our lives. We were two people who had been defined by loss, tentatively stepping into the light together. The weeks that followed were transformative. The manor, once a cold and silent tomb, began to fill with life. The sound of children's laughter echoed in hallways that had only known sorrow. Amelia's vocabulary expanded daily, her little voice a constant happy murmur. Leo discovered a passion for rebuilding the crumbling stone walls of the garden, becoming a surprisingly adept amateur mason. Roland was a changed man. He worked from home, his study door always open. He joined us for every meal. He taught Leo how to skip stones across the pond and spent hours sitting with Amelia, patiently watching her draw. He was no longer a ghost in his own home. He was a father. He was present. My role shifted seamlessly from governess to something more. I was a teacher, a friend, a confidante. I was the steady center around which this fragile, healing family revolved. My relationship with Roland deepened, though it remained unspoken. It grew in shared glances over the children's heads, in long conversations during our nightly walks in the garden, in the comfortable silences that spoke of a deep, mutual understanding. We were building a partnership, one quiet moment at a time. One warm evening in late summer, we were sitting on our bench in the garden. The space was almost unrecognizable from the tangled wilderness we had first entered. The rose bushes were heavy with fragrant blooms, the flower beds were a riot of color, and Amelia's forget-me-nots had spread into a beautiful carpet of blue. It was a testament to our shared work, a living symbol of our family's rebirth. Roland reached over and took my hand. His touch was warm and firm, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Judith," he said, his voice low and serious, "when you first came here, this house was a place of ghosts. I was a ghost. I thought my life had ended when I lost Liana." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But you came, and you didn't try to chase the ghosts away. You just let the light in, little by little. You didn't just bring my children back to me. You brought me back to myself." He turned to face me, his stormy gray eyes clear and filled with an emotion that made my heart beat faster. "I see my future now, and it's not a lonely one. It's filled with laughter and drawings and poorly built stone walls." A small smile touched his lips. "It's filled with you, Judith, if you'll have me." He wasn't offering me a name, or a fortune, or a place in society. He was offering me a place in his heart, a place in his family. He was offering me a home. "Yes," I whispered, my own eyes filling with tears. "Yes, Roland, I will." Our wedding was nothing like the grand society affair Isabella would have planned. It was a small, simple ceremony in our garden, the one we had brought back to life together. Leo stood beside his father as his best man, looking proud and impossibly grown up in his little suit. Amelia was my flower girl, her long hair woven with blossoms she had picked herself. She walked down the grassy aisle, scattering petals and chattering happily to her teddy bear, who also wore a small floral crown for the occasion. Mrs. Gable was there, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Our only guests were the birds in the trees and the flowers that stood as witnesses. We said our vows under the old trellis, where the climbing roses were in full, magnificent bloom. A year later, you would not have recognized Blackwood Manor. It was no longer a monument to grief, but a vibrant, loving home. The heavy velvet curtains had been replaced with lighter ones that let the sunshine stream in. The polished floors were often scuffed with mud from the garden, and the solemn silence had been permanently broken by the sound of music, arguments over board games, and the joyful shrieks of children at play. We were in the garden, celebrating Amelia's 7th birthday. She was now a bright, talkative girl who had traded her sketchbook for a camera, determined to document every flower and insect in her kingdom. She was showing me a picture she had just taken of a ladybug on a rose petal. Leo, now a lanky, thoughtful boy on the cusp of his teens, was patiently teaching Roland how to properly repot an orchid without damaging its roots. Roland, my husband, was listening with a look of intense concentration, a smudge of dirt on his nose. He caught my eye across the lawn and smiled, a smile so full of love and contentment that it took my breath away. Looking at them, at this beautiful, improbable family we had built, I thought back to Isabella. I sometimes saw her name in the society pages, always attached to some new, wealthy industrialist or minor European royal. She was still chasing the glittering prize, still trying to secure a position, a title, a fortune. She thought that was where value lay. She had looked at Roland and seen a name and a bank account. She had looked at me and seen a servant. She never understood that true wealth isn't something you acquire, it's something you build. It's built in the quiet moments, in the shared work of healing. It's found in the courage of a little boy defending his sister, and the miracle of a silent girl finding her voice. It's the steadfast love that grows, slowly and patiently, from the broken ground of sorrow, just like a garden. Isabella had wanted to be the queen of a grand estate, but I had become the heart of a home, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I had been given the entire world, The greatest lesson I learned through all of this is that a true partner isn't someone who completes your public image, but someone who helps you rebuild your private world. It's not about finding someone who can give you everything you want, but about finding someone you can build a meaningful life with, one small, quiet moment at a time. True strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the patient, steady hand that's willing to tend to a neglected garden, waiting for things to bloom again. I'd love to hear your own stories. Have you ever been underestimated, only to find that your perceived weaknesses were actually your greatest strengths? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories about the quiet power of the human heart. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my journey. I hope it inspires you to find the beauty in the quiet places and to never ever underestimate the power of a patient and loving heart.